Welcome back to another episode of Mushrooms Chronic, but I'm Iconic, where we dive deep into the stories and insight that shape our world. Today, we're thrilled to have a very special guest joining us, Sara-Louise Ackrill, the dynamic founder and CEO behind Why Differently, Start Differently, and the wNDErful app. Sara-Louise is a true trailblazer in the realm of neurodiversity, pioneering groundbreaking initiatives that empower neurodivergent professionals and students, from personalized coaching and virtual assistants to impactful non-profit work, and an innovative app that's about to come out soon, designed to support unique needs. Sarah Louise's contribution are nothing short of transformative. In this episode, we'll uncover the incredible journey of Sarah Louise, delve into the unique services offered by her organisation, and explore the powerful story of those who have benefited from her work. You will gain valuable insights into how tailored support can make a profound difference and hear firsthand how Sarah Louise is driving change in the neurodivergent community. So, grab a cup of tea, get cozy, and settle down for an inspiring conversation that promises to challenge perceptions and ignite new ideas. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe so we can continue to do the work that we're doing and make an impact on the world. What do you do? What's your background? What do you do?
So my background is as a therapist. I trained from the age of 29 to 34. And then therapy was sometimes my day job, sometimes a side gig. And then it became full time. And then I became an entrepreneur in 2020. Um, because working as a therapist, I identified lots of needs for products and services that didn't exist yet on the market. And I thought, well, I potentially have the business skills to bring them to fruition. So then I became a therapist and entrepreneur.
Can you walk us through the pivotal moments in your personal and professional life that led you to establishing Why Differently, Start Differently, and the wNDErful app? What were the
Yes, of
defining
course.
experiences that shaped, your vision for these initiatives?
Wow, well, that's such a beautiful question. And it's a really good opportunity to look back, actually. So this is completely off. I haven't prepared for this, which is how I like it. I think it's more natural. So I would say things like leaving home at 16. I think that was pretty important. I had to be very resourceful very quickly. I was very underprotected. I mean, I was a child out there in the big wide world, paying rent and working several jobs in London. I wasn't from London, I'm from Devon originally. I think that has been a big thing because a lot of my work is based on helping people to be more independent with their disability. That might be their neurodiversity, but it might also be physical and other health conditions. I'm interested in disability generally. Things like the fact that education for me wasn't linear. So I didn't start and finish school at, 5 to 18. I left school very quickly because I'd run away basically at 16 and then had to go back and do night school while I was working full time. When I was at university, I had three jobs. And then post university, all my therapy training, that's all been while I've been working multiple jobs. So I think that's important because I know what it's like to have to really be very dedicated. I remember sitting up at 2 a.m. doing my sociology A levels and having to be in reception at 7 to check people out of a hotel and in Paris. And, working really hard, I think has been great. I think I had a sort of hypomanic episode in 2001. I had to go to a psychiatric unit as an outpatient, but it was an emergency referral. That's definitely a pivotal moment. I was living in Bath. I basically had what they thought at the time was bipolar, which I can understand why they thought it was bipolar. I developed a sense of unreality, and I was I was high as a kite, really. There's no other way of feeling. I mean, I felt like I was kind of bigger than the houses, and I had no sense of proportion, and it felt like my body was that sort of like, if you imagine the Michelin man in the Michelin logo. I felt huge, like my shoulders were as high as the rooftops, and I had this, but I knew I wasn't. I knew that this was just a feeling, but it was, everything felt very unreal and marshmallowy and weird. But at the same time, I was fine and normal. So it was like I was living in two realities. And I went to the doctor and said, I'm going to harm myself if you don't sort my brain out. Like there's something really not okay, and I can't control my moods. Like I'm laughing till I'm crying, and basically it turns out that I had a lot of stress, and I'd had a sort of serotonin reuptake, but underneath that I was undiagnosed neurodivergent. So that was definitely a huge pivotal moment, because I know what it's like to be seen as weird and chronically, seriously mentally ill. And I know what it's like to wonder what reality really is and question myself to my core, and see that look in people's faces where you've absolutely lost any kind of credibility with them. I think it took a long time for me to recover from that. And the RSD, through being ADHD or having ADHD, I've got, I'm much better now, but I have always had lots of rejection sensitivity. So when you combine that with feeling very ill and being very kind of, in this alternate reality, like that's not a great combination. So I think that was a huge thing for me. I couldn't even talk about it for a decade without crying. I just felt so broken and ashamed. And yeah, I think a lot of my struggles have been pivotal. I definitely know what a lot of things feel like. I went bankrupt when I was 26 in the High Court. I was a foreign citizen at that point. I've known kind of serious mental ill health. I've known debt. I've known domestic abuse. So I would say that I'm glad, actually. I'm really glad. Coming through all of that has meant I've got insight into things that I think a lot of private therapists wouldn't have, even if they trained in those subjects specifically. And I'm proud of that. So, yeah. But it's weird because I'm automatically focusing on all the really sort of hard things. I'm sure there are nice things that have formed my character, but they don't spring to mind as easily, do they?
Definitely. I feel like it's those challenges that make things the way that they are at the same time.
100%.
Yeah. In developing Inquire differently, you've incorporated a diverse range of services tailored for neurodivergent individuals. How did you determine which services to offer, and how do you ensure that they remain adaptable to the evolving needs of your clients or patients?
Goodness, I love your questions. So quite frankly, the VA service, so we have a virtual assistant service with a team of 29, and a lot of the team are virtual assistants. To be quite frank, that actually started because when I was in the pandemic, I didn't want to go back to a day job in an office because it was making me ill. But I also couldn't be a full-time therapist. I thought I'm going to need an income that is not quite so intense and that gives me a bit of sort of, normality. So I actually did it because I thought, well, that will pay the bills and I'm good at it. I've been a good PA. I used to be PA to a vice president at Hilton. But actually, as I got my first client called me and said, "Oh my goodness, this is amazing. You're neurodivergent, offering a VA service for neurodivergence. That's amazing. How did you think of it?" And I said, "Actually, I hadn't, but thanks. Like, that's an amazing idea. I should just do this for neurodivergent people." So I still credit her to this day. She's called Nikki. I still credit her to this day as the one that came up with the idea, because it wasn't my intention. And then it went really well. And then I started scaling it up. So that's how the VA service happened. But the other services, things like public speaking, support and informal advocacy, learning and development, all of that has been very organic. So when I go to a company and I do a talk, very often they'll say, "Thanks a lot. We've now done the awareness piece. We've had lots of interest, loads of questions. Lots of people have started sort of coming out, as it were, in the workplace. What do we do now? How do we implement the things you suggested?" Because I don't think anyone has money for talks where it's literally the inspo piece, or, I feel like people want talks with tips and hacks and strategies, and I don't blame them. I would want added value if I was paying for a talk. But then once you've given those things, I kind of like, okay, well, now we need to, implement them? So could you come back and do a webinar, or could you train our HR team, or could you train our team managers? So then an L&D department formed, but that wasn't the plan. And then I added associates for coaching and therapy because we ended up getting requests from people and it was all quite niche. And I am an associate of Zoe Clues Associates, which is a sort of West End practice in London, where we do neurodiversity coaching. But I have a specific interest in domestic abuse, for example. So we've scaled up our team. We've got sort of South Asian culture specialism. We've got domestic abuse specialism. We've got alcohol. So things that Zoe Clues Associates don't cover, we cover specifically also from a neurodivergent point of view. So I think being a neurodiversity coach and therapist means that you're always talking to people and finding that there are things people are struggling with. And then, if you know the right people and you can collaborate, you might as well create them. I would actually find it really hard to be a therapist and listen to all these things that don't exist out there and then not try and do something about that.
Starting Differently focuses on providing support through a non-profit model. What were the key challenges you faced in creating a sustainable model for a non-profit organization, and how have you navigated these challenges to achieve your mission?
Well, so Start Differently was conceived of 18 months ago, but we're only just now really present online with proper branding. We've got our first learning and development and initiatives on there. So we actually started it, my business partner Anthony Gribbenlal and we actually started it because he works in education. I come from neurodiversity and employability. We wanted people to have training and small grants that sort of supported them into employment and self-employment and entrepreneurship, because nobody can do anything in life without an income, without being self-sustaining. And we wanted to help with that area of vulnerability. There are only 15% of autistic people, for example, who are in work. And those who are in paid work are very often underemployed, or much more part-time than they would otherwise have chosen. So that's a really concerning statistic. But in terms of how we've navigated challenges, I think the biggest challenge is you can't be a registered charity until you have an income of 5,000 a year. You can't bring in 5,000 a year very easily unless you're a registered charity, because nobody's going to just, give money to something that doesn't look official. So that's been a bit chicken and egg. I think anyone starting a charity, I mean, I know that we could have gone down the social enterprise route, but I would say Wired Differently, although it's profit making, is pretty much a social enterprise anyway, certainly a social impact company. We wanted a proper distinction from that. We wanted something that was a registered charity. So we're still in that process now because it isn't actually that straightforward. I think that's been the biggest hurdle.
The wNDErful app, represents a technological approach to supporting neurodivergent individuals. Can you elaborate on the process of designing this app, which is currently in development?
Yeah, of course.
What influenced you to create this app, and do it the way it is, if that makes sense?
Yeah, of course. So what inspired the app was I've always had a WhatsApp system with my clients, my therapy and coaching clients, where they've been able to brain dump to me 24/7. I've always had my phone sound off. I've always archived my chats. There's never been a problem with boundaries. But I know that neurodivergent people very often will wake up at 3 a.m. with an amazing idea, know where to put it. They'll be really worried about something, on a Sunday or sometime that you're not talking to your therapist or coach. And I never wanted to put the door in someone's face, but I also can't be there 24/7, which no one has ever expected me to be. So we have this shared space, which is a bit like a scrapbook or a diary. You're not leaving your diary around for I don't know, how your husband or your daughter to find it and then read something about themselves that annoyed you. It's confidential if you're sharing it with your therapist on WhatsApp. WhatsApp is encrypted. So from that, I decided, well, I'd like to scale this up. I'd like to have loads of people that can brain dump and, have somewhere to put their thoughts and then have someone that they can go to at any time, a little bit like a helpline. And I've always had a lot of time for helplines. I trained with Rape Crisis. And I have used the Samaritans in the past, mainly for sounding board kind of input. I'm very fortunately, I've not often felt very desperate in my life, although there's been a couple of times where I've called them for that many, many years ago. And the Samaritans are not just there for that. They are there for more of a sort of listening service. People tend to think of them as a sort of suicide service. And I've always had this appreciation of helplines and people that you can just speak to who are not coaches, not therapists, not going to charge you, but they're people who are there for you in your, darkest hour. And I've always been inspired by that model. So those two charities in particular, Samaritans and Rape Crisis, really have always inspired me. I've always looked up to them. And I just decided during the pandemic that this could be an app. And I spoke to someone who was, actually really prominent, because I got the ear of really prominent people really quickly. I got offered investment within the first couple of weeks. I mean, it was quite a ride. It was really unexpected. And they sort of said to me, you can't scale this up by WhatsApp. You're going to need an app, because I didn't really want an app, I'll be honest. I just saw it as a really expensive button. And I'm not a tech person, as you can probably tell from what I've just said. But I just thought, I don't want it to be an app if it doesn't have to be. I don't want an app to be cool. I want an app because it's needed. And they were kind of like, these advisors were saying, yeah, but, you can't scale up with GDPR and confidentiality and safely support people without the protection of that sort of container of what an app gives you. And so I thought, right, okay. So then I started to design it. I actually did it on a PowerPoint, and the UX design is actually going to be finished tomorrow. So it was the third of 12 projects, but it's actually the 12th to fly the nest. But I really believe in it. I believe there's nothing else like it, in the sense that if I'm having a meltdown, which happens to all of us, I don't have anyone I can call. I can't call the Autistic Society. They might send me a leaflet. I don't know if they have a helpline. I don't think so. I don't believe there are other helplines I can call. I might be wrong, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, because, I've done research, but there's always resources I'm hearing about all the time. But none of my clients have ever said to me, oh, it was great on, Tuesday. I had a wobble and called this number or WhatsApped or what. But the other thing is, our app is, because we don't really use the phone. So as much as I'm a fan of the Samaritans, it's phone based generally. And I wanted a web chat based helpline function for ND people. And I wanted it to be aimed at the sort of LinkedIn professionals kind of market, university students. My market is very much neurodivergent people without learning disability, whereas a lot of neurodiversity stuff gets framed as being more to do with, say, education, social services, children, learning disability, special educational needs, and that's not actually my market.
Considering the broad scope of your work, how do you balance the individual needs of those you work with the broader objectives of your organization? Can you provide an example of the time when you had to make a difficult decision between these two priorities?
Well, when I was doing business training, I've done 4 different accelerators, and my mentors in the beginning would be like, you've got way too many projects. This isn't tenable. But the thing is it's the same market for all the projects. So most of our clients at Wired Differently actually use multiple services. Most of them are seeing us for coaching. They're having some business advice. They are, maybe recommending us for talks in their company. Maybe then, people they know are being suggested to come and work with us as a virtual assistant. I would say we're quite sort of direct about our market. We're quite sort of defined in who we are here for. So the market I just described, the sort of professionals, university students, people that don't have learning disability, if you are in that group of people, you are likely to benefit from multiple services at Wired Differently. And so there's a lot of cross-fertilization, but sometimes we've had to make decisions where the person has said, I'm looking for support with neurodiversity, but I have made the call that actually I think the presenting issue might be something other than the actual issue. So we've had a few people approach us and say, I'd really like to see you, assuming that I have ADHD. I don't have a formal diagnosis, but I'm pretty sure it's that. And then I might have met them and said, actually, I don't think that's the main issue from my personal perspective. And I don't feel that we can support you because I actually think you need to go and see a doctor, or you need to maybe be very clear on what your diagnosis is. I mean, a lot of people in our community are self-diagnosed. That's absolutely fine. But I'm talking about when there are presenting issues where I'm thinking, I'm not sure this person isn't a bit too vulnerable to be using a private service. They probably need to be plugged in more to, say, social services, having maybe a carer, and also maybe some people are better suited to face-to-face. So we've sometimes had to make the call that a virtual service might not be appropriate. We try not to let money be a barrier. That's why we started Start Differently. We also help people with access to work grants. So we've not really had to make any difficult calls with regards to, I'm sorry, you can't afford us, because although we're private, we manage to be really accessible and really flexible. So it's not often we've had to make those calls, but there have been some people approach us. And I just don't feel we can provide them with the scaffolding that they need as a private company being paid by the hour. And I don't feel that's fair when they could maybe find more help elsewhere for free that's more tailored to their needs if they're really vulnerable, for example.
Your work spans, various aspects of professional development, including coaching, branding, and public speaking. How do you integrate these elements into creating a coercive support system for neurodivergent individuals? And what unique approaches do you employ to ensure effectiveness?
So some of the initiatives that we have are because of the skill sets on our team. So we try to be supportive in providing a really joined up sort of I want to say a web of support. I'm not sure if web is the right term, but we try to do joined up support. So for example, if I'm seeing someone for coaching and they're telling me that they're spending, let's say I'm seeing someone for business coaching specifically, and then they tell me that they're spending half the week where they're not earning anything because they're doing paperwork and report writing, I might say to them, well, nothing to do with me because I don't manage that part of the business. But if you go and see Julian, you might want a VA, and then you might be earning far more money and then paying very little in exchange to free up half your time. And then we might say, would you, and that might sound a bit like kind of, I suppose it is cross-selling, and I'm very proud to be a business person. I'm providing something in a private market. And there is a business incentive as well as a personal and professional and neurodiversity and ethical incentive, but I am also a business person. So there is an element of cross-selling, but there is also the fact that a lot of neurodivergent people, they don't want to create multiple relationships with multiple people. So it actually really suits them that they come to us as a one-stop shop. And I want it to be that for them if that's what they choose. If they only want one service from us and they get some, we recommend other people all the time, because I would rather, some people like things to be very separate. Some people would like to come to Wired differently and see me maybe as their therapist, but they'd like to do everything else externally, and that's absolutely fine. So I think what makes us unique is we do a lot of joined up working between the different services. Obviously, we have to be really careful with confidentiality. But then we also know sometimes that that person might struggle with the joined up nature of how we work, and they may just want one service from us, or we may not be right for them at all. So I think that is helpful for people. And yeah, generally people find that means that we're a service to them.
The concept of neurodiversity and neurodivergence is gaining traction globally in terms of awareness, not as much as it should be because it's still, very far behind. How do you stay ahead of the trends and incorporate new research or best practices into your organization? Can you share a recent development or trend that has significantly influenced your work?
So social impact measurement is really important to us, and how we grow and make sure that we're staying abreast of things is we work with a huge network of mostly neurodivergent and minority-owned freelancers specializing in different areas. So I might come across as a bit of a megalomaniac having a finger in all these different pies, and you might think, well, hang on, you're a therapist, how are you doing an app and this, that, and the other? But actually we collaborate with so many people who bring all the other skill sets. So, for example, measuring your social impact and the good that you're doing in the world, rather than just saying to someone, were you happy with the service you received? Measuring, how your team are, the sustainability, whether you are, working in an ethical manner, what impact you're having on the environment, what impact you're having reputationally on the movement of neurodiversity. Like looking at all of these areas, I think is really important. I don't think there's many companies actually tracking it, and we are already working with an external consultant. She's called Nicola Lynch, and she's an expert in social impact measurement. So that's one example of staying ahead, or even being a bit ahead of the trend, because I don't think in reality a lot of people are monitoring that yet. But I think maybe when you're a startup, it's easy to start the process as part of being in the early days. We're only 4 years old, whereas if you've got a 20-year-old company, all of a sudden building social impact measurement in would be a very different challenge. And in terms of staying abreast of the neurodiversity world, I build in a lot of reading time. So I'm kind of influenced by my time at uni, when you've got reading weeks and things. And I do build in time. So the other day, what I do on a weekly basis is I write down a list of, I wish I knew more about ... It might be a report that's just come out. It might be a certain type of therapy. It might be signposting for a certain type of issue. It might be a business thing. It might be something where I'm lacking confidence in myself. And I'll just do a list of, because I remember at uni them saying, read to find out. Don't just read. And I like that idea of having a tick list of, well, this week I want to know more about this, this, and this. And then I genuinely feel a bit more equipped for the following week. Because otherwise it is actually really easy to get your head down and get lost in emails and the day-to-day running of the business, and actually be like, well, I don't really know what the Lilac Review is saying, and I don't really know, what is going on in the world of, neurodiversity, and it might be women's health, it might be tech, it might be employability, it could be anything. And it would be really easy to, I think in any job, it's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day, but then forget the bigger picture, forget what's happening in the world outside the business, and then lose touch. And that is something I'm sure that will happen at times, but I'd rather it didn't. And I want to try and limit that, possibility. But I do love reading. I think that really helps.
Definitely. I feel like, being, a chief executive, or you need to be up to date, with it. Like, especially when there's always an influx of information, a new research, a new trend, it can be exhausting.
It can be. I think one way I get around that is I'm very clear on my specialisms. So I work with neurodiversity, firstly as a therapist. One special interest is employability and self-employment and entrepreneurship. I'm also really into domestic abuse, as it can be identified via the workplace specifically. So I try to focus on those three areas and not ever give the impression that I'm an expert in any other area, because I just feel that we can't always be on top of our game in every single bit of neurodiversity. There's plenty of people working in this field. There's no need to be. And I don't want to get overwhelmed or feel I'm lacking in some way. And I want to provide real value to our clients. So I think being specific is quite helpful, in being selective then on what you feel that you should be up to date on.
Definitely. I feel like that's a really good thing to keep in mind, especially when you're running an organization. I feel like transparency is everything.
Well, we do love a rabbit hole as well. And, I could quite easily, sometimes I'll be honest, I'm sat here on my clients know it because I'll tell them, and I'll be sat here with 20 tabs open because everyone I've spoken to that day has told me about something which I did. Oh, I want to know about that. And then about 10 o'clock at night, I'm sat here with 20 tabs going, well, what do I do now? I can't research everything. So sometimes it's about going, what, I might mess up. I might actually fall out of date on that particular topic. But I try to always be really clear on, do I think I'm up to date? Do I think the client should do some further work? Am I an expert or not? Am I talking from lived experience or professional experience? I think it's really important to clarify the two. So I try to be very clear on the information I'm giving. I come from an information advice and guidance background as well. So I think it helps that I'm really into quality information and And quite frankly, if I don't know what I'm talking about, I'll just be like, that's, I get asked to do things sometimes, and I'm like, I'm sorry, that's just not my area. I don't work with children. I don't work with people with with learning disability. I've been asked to do all sorts of things, and you think, well, that's really flattering, and thank you, but that's just not me. And you could find someone better for that. And I think it's really important to do that and not get carried away.
Definitely. I was just about to ask you about that. In your experience, what are some of the most common misconceptions about neurodivergence that you encounter, and how do you address these misconceptions through your work?
Oh, well, I mean, I think that we all are familiar with the whole "you don't look autistic" thing, and the fact that autism must have a look of some kind. I did get told at one point, I went to my friend's opening for her app, her launch party, and was told, "You look too nice in your cocktail." Not. But how do I sort out? Well,
Sorry,
I'll tell you how. I'll tell
you
you how
cut
I.
out from
Oh,
cocktail. Can you
oh, sorry.
please?
Well, how I deal with misconceptions. I think one of the most prevalent misconceptions is that you can look autistic. And one of my favorite responses was when I went to my friend's app launch party and someone introduced me as working in neurodiversity, and the person said, "Oh, what got you into that?" And I said, "Well, I am actually autistic myself and ADHD and everything." And he just sort of said, "Oh, but you look so nice in your cocktail dress to be autistic." And I was kind of like, okay, I really don't know what to say about that. But to answer your question, I then turned those really kind of naive anecdotes into things that I use in my talks, because there's nothing else I can do with them. That it's cathartic. I'm sure that person meant something really pleasant by that. And I found it really quite offensive. I'm not actually easily offended, but I'm really lucky because I've got a platform where I talk to corporates all the time, and I do training, and I do, all this lovely work where I get to talk and I get to pour it into that. But before, 5 years ago, I didn't have an outlet where I could say, "Oh, someone's just told me I can't be autistic because I'm wearing a cocktail dress and I look too nice in it." I was working, in a completely different context with different types of people. I wasn't working for myself. I think you definitely get a lot more freedom when you do. So I really feel for people who are neurodivergent and not working in neurodiversity, because they don't have the opportunity necessarily to pour that kind of crassness into their work. So that's kind of how I handle it. All the difficult stuff, I'll have a meltdown on a train, but then I'll do a LinkedIn post, and then I'll get DMs from people saying, "Thank you so much for posting that. I can't like your post because I don't want people at work to know I'm neurodivergent. But because you posted that, I felt better about the fact that I had a meltdown this week. And my husband said, I looked like I was angry or aggressive and it upset me, and I just pour it back into the pot, make use of it in the business. It's my catharsis, really."
You dealt so well with that. I would have been so upset. I would have had a meltdown right there and then.
Well, I mean, there are things where I don't. Do you know something I had recently? I've got to tell you about this. I had brain spotting. I had 3 sessions of brain spotting, which is a supercharged version of EMDR, which is empirically sound and really respected and incredible and very fast and very cheap, actually. And honestly, I'm so less offended. I brush things off more. I'm more resilient. I'm really impressed by what a difference it's made to my therapist said I had to have it as a sort of bit of an emergency measure because I had a real trauma reaction to something. I'm going back now probably 6 to 8 weeks. And it was really terrifying. And she said to me, I'm not into anything woo-woo or newfangled, and I don't get overly excited about all these new techniques because I'm a bit, in her words, old and, long in the tooth. But she said, "Please, I beg you, go and have brain spotting. I can't see you like this." And I did it. And I personally can only speak from my experience, and I'm not a brain spotter, but I can't get over it. And so I'm far less triggered. I'm finding that I'm remembering now what it's like to just react to stuff rather than be triggered by it. So I'm really impressed by this type of therapy. So I just wanted to mention it in case it's helpful to anyone else.
Definitely. I feel like EMDR, even the way that was founded, is just crazy.
Well, EMDR, I mean, the NICE guidelines say up to 24 sessions, although I don't know anyone who's ever had that many sessions. I know people that get a lot of relief from it far quicker than 24.
Yeah, definitely, especially with NHS funding.
Of course.
Yeah. Start Differently aims to make, a significant impact on communities. How do you measure the success of your programs and initiatives? And what feedback mechanisms do you use to assess and enhance your impact?
Well, this goes back to the social impact measurement that we're doing, which I'm pleased to say touches on all three organizations and every single thing we do internally and externally. So with Start Differently in particular, because we're not for profit, we are either looking at individuals who pay us where we literally just cover our costs, and they're quite welcome to approach us if they want to learn about whatever. We're not going to say, oh, you've got to be referred by such and such agency. But being not for profit, the vast majority of our work at Start Differently is and will be funded by charities and other not-for-profits and the public sector. And they all demand, reports and figures and empirical measurements on, well, when this person started, how confident were they whether we're going to get work, and how many interviews have they had? And so it depends on who's funding what. We've previously had things funded by the NHS, the National Lottery, through other organizations. And so I know that each funding body has its own criteria. So we use things like face-to-face interviews for people who want to talk out their feedback. We use an anonymous suggestion box that people can post to at any time. We've got no idea who's done it, but we get their feedback. We have a sort of how am I doing link on our email signatures, a bit like the how am I driving that you see on the back of a lorry. We make sure that everyone knows all the different people at the company. So if, for example, we've got it Start Differently, we've got a board of trustees. So we make sure people know who they could go to. We're very clear on any, conflicts of interest. So people are completely transparent and comfortable in, well, when I speak to so-and-so, what approach are they coming from? Yeah, I think there's probably more we could do. We are at the beginning of devising the overall strategy for social impact measurement. But I mean, literally an hour ago, I was looking at the new surveys that we're going to use at the end of our L&D, and fitting them more to services going into corporates rather than using questionnaires that maybe previously would have been used more in, say, social services or health context. So it's about having the right feedback mechanisms for the right product, for the right market. I think, though, we could do a bit more with diversity. I'm very conscious of that. And I'm really happy to write bids where organizations can draw down funding so we can deliver our services for whatever their market is. It could be people in a geographical location. It could be people of a certain culture, people of a certain age group. Our products and services are generally very agnostic. So whoever can draw down funding to make use of them, we can flex and adapt.
Can you delve into your personal experiences that first highlighted your neurodivergence, and how these experiences influenced your decision to build a career around supporting neurodivergent individuals?
Well, I'm trying to avoid the whole I always knew I was different thing. I don't like saying that because I think neurodivergents know what we mean by that. But I think to a neurotypical, it comes across as, oh, I always knew I was special. And I definitely don't ever want there to be an us and them thing with neurodivergent and neurotypical people. So to rephrase that kind of sentiment, I would say I always felt like I was behind double glazing. When someone says I always felt different, my version of I always felt different is that sense of being around loads of people, being pretty confident. I've always attracted people to me. I've not always held on to them that long until recently in life because I didn't know how to. I was the classic ND bridge burner. I was the classic, I want to say female ND bridge burner, because I know we can be, particularly challenged by holding on to relationships if not attracting them. So I think that inspired me eventually. I also was incapable of being in a relationship. I was incapable without feeling suicidal within weeks. I was incapable of living with a partner. I didn't want children and don't, I want to say I don't want children, but I think that's pretty obvious at 46. I don't have any, but I didn't just not want children, but I actually had a phobia where I couldn't be around pregnant people because I just felt too weirded out, too physically nauseous, and I knew that wasn't normal. And I thought, well, I want to be a good auntie to my nephews. I've got 3 absolutely stunning nephews, and I didn't want to be a bad auntie because I was phobic of being around babies and pregnancy, and I didn't want to not be a good person. And so I think all of those things meant that I got diagnosed. And then I realized, oh, well, this is why ever since I started therapy 11 years ago, everyone's been neurodivergent, even if they weren't when I saw them, or they didn't know they were when I saw them, rather. They then messaged me even years later going, oh, by the way, I saw you years ago, and yes, I've now got my diagnosis, and now we know why, and we were right, we'd worked this out then, and I just wanted to contact you and let you know. And so then I was like, oh, this is why I've always attracted ND people. And then as I started unmasking, I realized I couldn't work with neurotypical people anymore. And so I only see and have only seen neurodivergent people in private practice now for years, because I just feel that I'm completely unmasked and I see the world in very different terms now. So I've got rid of my internalized ableism. I understand something of the minority experience by being in a couple of minority groups. So I'm LGBT and ND for starters. And I just think that as I evolved as a person, so did my work. But then that's what I see in my clients. That's why I'm glad to do therapeutic and business coaching, because very often people will say, well, I'm sorted out now, as it were. Can we now look at my business? I don't think I want to do that anymore. I don't think I want to go back to that job. I want to change. I don't think I want relationships like that. I think I might be gay. I think I might be this. And I think it's natural. I think it's all connected, right? It would be a bit weird to work out who you are finally and then find that you're in the perfect job and everything else around you was bang on, because this fundamental thing has changed. So naturally, everything else is then going to have to shift, which is quite daunting. But for me, it was quite organic. And I had the fortune to have the whole of the lockdowns to work a lot of this out. Obviously, COVID was horrific and is horrific. My personal experience was life-changing, life-saving in a way.
Yeah, I agree. Like COVID, like my life was quite normal during COVID. So coming to care and stuff like that. But like it was life-saving in so many aspects because it just gave you that push that you needed. That makes sense.
Yeah, 100%. And the space and the quiet, and the space to reflect and think and go back to things that I'd wanted to do years ago and projects. And yeah, it was just, for a lot of us, it was a great opportunity. And I think it's a shame that we haven't seen television programs and podcasts and radio programs talking about all the positives that happened in that time, because, there was tragedy, but there was also a huge number of people, most of whom were in minority populations, who didn't ever want to go back to the office. The last people to want to go back to normal life were people in all different minority groups, because they were the ones, or we were the ones, that felt excluded from life. And we actually felt like, I belong, for the first time. And it's a shame that we don't openly celebrate that, probably through fear of looking crass and insensitive. But both things are true, and one doesn't negate the other.
Yeah, it's definitely dialectical. How's your personal understanding of neurodiversity evolved over the years, and what pivotal moments in your life have significantly shaped this understanding?
The one that comes to mind first is my understanding of trauma. So we have a lot of complex trauma in our society. And when I joined Zoe Clues and Associates, I think I took in a lot of neurodiversity knowledge that they had not previously had. They've now got myself and Octavia. who work as therapists and coaches in that area. But I, on my side, didn't have the input regarding trauma. And my knowledge of trauma since I joined and the upskilling I've done in that area has just been really, it's just been hugely important in the work, in evolving our business, in me looking after myself, me getting brain spotting. Yeah, and I think that that has shaped everything. I think it's shaped how I've seen my childhood, how it's made me more resilient as a leader. I think that the company is going to be a lot better off and a lot safer because I will be more resilient, basically, as CEO, because of that understanding of trauma. I think also I've done a lot with work around addiction. So I'm not our addiction specialist by any stretch, but we have Monica Labie who is. But I think my knowledge of addiction, to at least be able to identify addiction where it's not obvious, to then at least refer the person to Monica, I think is great. Integrating the domestic abuse stuff, that was not a given when I started the company. I did not realize I was going to be able to do that, but domestic abuse really disproportionately affects neurodivergent people. It's also a massive reason that people are either not earning or under earning or losing jobs because of the behavior of their abusers. So yeah, I think there are certain key areas. And also, I think my knowledge, we have Jo Warmby who works with us, who's a movement expert, and she's done Rolfing and Hella work with me over the years, and she's massively changed my life and how I feel in my body as someone with, undiagnosed dyspraxic traits. And I mean, I've been in A&E and felt unsafe enough in my body enough times to know about all my dyspraxic type issues. And Jo gave me an appreciation for body work. So I then went and did some trauma release exercises and made contacts in those areas so I could then refer people on my caseload to them and just sort of say, we can't do everything by speaking. I can only be trained in so many things. I think you would benefit from the input of other professionals. So it's a really kind of open-minded approach. I don't hang on to my clients. I don't sort of say, you must see me weekly. You must have a minimum of 12 sessions. You must, talk this through. Sometimes I'm like, I don't think I'm the best person for the next couple of weeks. Go and see so-and-so and come back. And generally, they're just really pleased to have different input from different people. I think it makes the process richer, builds confidence, and I think all of those areas have enriched what we do across the organizations.
Reflecting on your early career, were there any specific challenges or insight related to your neurodivergence that guided you towards, finding why differently and start differently? How did these insights become the foundation for your professional goals?
Well, the main insight was I wanted to be a therapist since I was 12. So even when I was in other areas, so I was in hospitality, I did luxury hospitality up to and beyond training, because training is very long and then takes a long time to get a private caseload. And I was just a counselor. I mean, it didn't seem to matter what job I did. I was in sales, I was PA to the vice president, I was this, I was that, but I was still a counselor. I don't know, it's funny because when wNDErful started, I think there were people around me sort of going, well, hang on a minute, where's this come from? They didn't know me as being in this area. It was something that was so personal to me, and I sort of did various parts of my life, or I did it part-time, or I did it in the evenings, or I did it in a quirky way that I didn't really talk about. So I think for some people it took them by surprise that all of a sudden I had these organizations in a sector that no one really had heard about. But actually, I've been a counsellor since I was 12 in my head, in my body. And so to me, it was just, I'm becoming me finally. It was very much, I was like becoming it was my vocation without sounding too pretentious, but it's never been a job. So I think that insight when I was 12 of I want to be a therapist, and having to wait a very long time before anyone would accept me for training because I was so young, I think that is what basically formed everything, to be honest.
That's just amazing. I feel like people, it's that, vocation that are calling. it's different from, that ambition that you have. It just feels like
Yeah.
that purpose in your life, and this is what you're meant to do.
It was. I remember being in the toilets in the girls' toilets at school, and I would bunk off school to go to the loo and just sort of be there so people could pop down and talk to me about their periods, or they'd just started being sexually active, or their boyfriend had dumped them, or and that was what I lived for, was and how sorting out fights and arguments and mediating. And that was me at 30. Even the teachers would come to me, adults would come to me all through my childhood, which I get is completely inappropriate now, but I was just that little autistic professor, as they call us, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like, it's it's the aura, because a lot of people that I've worked with, who worked with me actually, not like, as like a professional young person or anything like that, they would tell me the most like personal things of their life, and I'm like, I'm just sitting with you. I'm just sitting with you. I would like engage. I'm not gonna be like, yeah, no, why are you talking to me about this? I would just sit and I'd be like, okay, like, yeah, and talk to them about it. And or like even just strangers. And I'm like,
you were at ease.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, that's fine. Don't worry about it. I've had a staff member that was my support worker who broke down over her boyfriend.
Wow.
And then I started crying for her. I don't cry for people. I barely cry for myself.
Yep.
And I'm like, it's okay. I just don't want you to be whatever. It's just, then I'm just getting emotional. And I'm like,
yeah.
I've noticed that's such a neurodivergent thing.
Do you think it's a neurodivergent thing? That's interesting.
Yeah.
I've not thought about it that way before, actually. And yet we're meant to lack empathy, so it's kind of odd, right?
Yeah. And people think we're supposed to be lacking feelings. We're supposed to be this like logic thing where it's like, yeah, that doesn't make sense. It's like impractical. Why are you so emotional, or whatever you have to say? And I'm just like, we just feel too much. We feel everything and
we're
anything.
Really sensitive. We are really, really sensitive. But then I get times I don't feel anything, where someone will say, I don't know, I'm having a baby or something, and I'll just be like, okay. And then I know I've got to do something, and I want to look warm, and I want to look happy, and I'm like, okay, are you okay with that? Are you pleased? And then they'll be like, well, yeah, obviously. Oh, amazing. Well, that's great. Like I'm so unnatural around things like that. But then they'll get a new job and I'll be absolutely like delighted for them. It's like something computes with me. It's more logical.
Definitely. It's like, for me, it's like people's pets dying, and I'm like, oh my God, that's so sad. How are you doing? Oh my God. All this fakeness. And I'm like, I really don't give a fuck that your like dogs died.
I get it. And until I had pets, well, I have a dog, but until I had pets, I wouldn't have got it. But actually, I still don't know if someone else having it would mean I would feel anything. And it's weird. It's nice to talk about this with an ND person, because with a neurotypical would be like, wow, you're dead on the inside and you're meant to be a therapist. But I just like the honesty, because I know, like you, that we are ridiculously sensitive, but also there are times we feel nothing. But I was saying this to my therapist earlier. Do you reckon neurotypicals genuinely feel something when someone announces their pregnancy or whatever? Or are they acting like they do because it's a social norm? Because that's the bit I'm not doing, but I'm not sure they feel more than I do. I think I'm just being more honest about it, maybe.
Yeah, and I feel like I personally feel like they're just programmed to be that way.
Yeah, I think it's true.
And I'm like, this person, them having a child, unless what is it adding to I love babies. I love them, very, very fond of them. Put me in a baby and I like melt over it. But is it adding anything significant to my life?
So even though you're a child person or a baby person, which I've said I'm not, you also have the same kind of, okay, what do I do with this kind of thing?
Like, it's good for you. Congratulations.
Yeah.
But you're telling me as if I'm having a baby. Like,
yes.
or even like, this is such an American thing, gender reveals. I'm
Oh,
like,
yes.
why am I supposed to care about the sex of your child? What am I supposed to be like? Oh my God, yay!
This is very
Like,
refreshing, this kind of conversation. And I hope people will listen to this and be like, oh my God, that's me. But at the same time, that child gets to 2 and something happens and the parents are like, need some help. Oh my goodness, I'll be there 24/7, like trying to
yeah,
help. But telling me the fact in itself of we're having a baby or we're getting married or blah, 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 I'm kind of like, okay, I don't know. The onus is on the person to react. And that's the bit I can't do. Tell me
yeah.
there's a problem and I'll fix it. I've learned in recent times just to be happy for people, but if I don't
Mm.
feel anything, I can't fake it, and I'm not prepared to fake anything.
Yeah, I'm just like, I get excited for weddings because I'm like, there's cake. Bet me good cake.
Yes,
I'll come to you for your cake
champagne.
tasting. Yeah, like I'll get excited. I will be more happy than the bride. Like, but I'm like, I'm not gonna feel any like I don't know what the significant. It's like I don't really care that you're having a child. Like I love babies, but it's like you're telling me I'm supposed to be like, yay.
I know it's difficult, isn't it? And the pressure it puts you under, and then you have all these like, well, I have all these intrusive thoughts of like, oh, I must be a really bad person. But I get it now a lot more than I did, but until recently in life, and having the business has given me the confidence to be out indie and proud. Whereas if I was back in an employed kind of workplace, would I be the set? I don't know really. Being self-employed has a lot of benefits that are not, not the obvious ones that you might assume, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I'm just yeah, and I'm like I'm not like you said. I don't have the energy to fake it either. Like
Yeah.
it's energy. It's like
That is energy. You're right, actually. That is a big factor, is the spoons it takes.
trust me, and I'm like, is this worth a spoon?
Yep.
It's like, is it worth it? Because usually it's not one spoon, it's like 20. And I'm like, oh, I love
Yeah.
you, but really not that much. I say that like I'm like, I love you, but like, do I care enough
But
to
equally, do you understand when something happens to you and other people aren't really that fussed? Because actually, I think I don't really expect other people to be thrilled for me about things because I think, well, that's my thing. So why would you? So it
Mm,
goes both ways. I don't.
yeah. I don't expect people to be happy for me. If I will share if something great is happening in my life, I don't expect you to be like, really? Like,
Yeah, it's
oh my
nice
God.
that someone listens, but you don't expect them to feel something because if it's you, you don't feel anything. So it's
Yeah,
different
definitely.
expectation, I think.
Yeah, and I'm like, what am I supposed to do about this?
Mm.
I'm glad like you're happy for me.
Yeah,
Great, but I just want to share this. You're significant in my life. I want to share this with you.
yeah.
And it ends there really. I'm like, it's not
Mm.
like a contract where I give you something and you give me something back. Like,
Yeah, sometimes just somebody listening would be enough. We don't need the reaction, but equally, when someone tells us something that's really good or really bad, I don't want to have to react either because that's a lot of work. And it assumes that I'm going to be fake in a way I'm not prepared to be. And if I'm not fake, that's somehow a bad thing. And then it all gets really confusing.
hmm, definitely. I'm just like, yeah, no. I look up at it and I was like, yeah, no, 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 no. Um, it's yeah, something. Yeah, I'm just all thinking about that. I'm just like, yeah, no. Um, what do you like? Working in a context where you're supposed to be in this caring role. I don't know why I did that. It is a caring role. Uh, but like, do you ever feel the pressure to react a certain way?
No, but I think that's actually why I see ND people. Because
Mm,
when I was seeing neurotypical people, I was having to say, by the way, I'm autistic, so I might not make eye contact. Um, I remember when I was still seeing neurotypical people, I would say something like, I sometimes have reactions to things that might be a bit surprising. Like you might say something and I might laugh, but that might be because I'm really feeling what you're saying and I feel in tune with you, as opposed to I'm laughing at you. And I remember there were a few things I used to have to mention, whereas actually when I think about it, I've not done that for about 5 years, which is about the time I've specialized in ND people. And so I think that that's basically why I specialized, because I then didn't have to explain. And actually I get a lot of people say things like, I came to you because you're a therapist and I saw that on LinkedIn you're really open about when you had a meltdown and I could relate, or you talked about your dog and I could relate. There's lots of I relate stuff, whereas neurotypical people I think would often be kind of like, why would I contact a therapist who I've just seen their meltdown on LinkedIn? Like that this person is unhinged or not credible or unprofessional. It's a very different way of looking at things. So basically I specialized because I'm myself, the other person can be themselves. And I always make sure that in my waiting room on Zoom, because I only practice on Zoom now and have done since I started the company, it says, please grab comforters, please eat or drink on the call if you want to. The number of times I've had young people get back from school or college, because I see over 16s, and I've said, oh, if you want, bring your tea on the call. And the mum has been, or the dad has been like, no, you can't. We're trying to prepare them for the workplace. I don't want them eating on a Zoom. I want them to know what real life's about. And I'm like, but that is real life if you have accommodations. As somebody who's just been masking for 8 hours and is now going through a Zoom therapy call and then probably has homework and basically won't switch off till they go to bed, and then they'll get up and go to school again. Like if I can just let them have their tea or turn their camera off, that's not me giving them special treatment. That's me teaching them what an accommodation looks like and helping them advocate for it in the future. So sometimes there are assumptions about what should and shouldn't be allowed. But do you know something? This morning, someone said on LinkedIn, there was something in the news recently. I won't refer to the exact thing because everyone has opinions on everything, but there was a particular thing that happened in the news recently, and someone was saying, about that thing. And I made a comment, and someone sort of obviously had looked at my profile and said, well, coming from you as a therapist, I am shocked at your unprofessionalism. And I just was like, I'm sorry, why? Because I'm a therapist, I'm not able to have an idea on something that happened in the news. I mean, sometimes I want to say, what do you think a therapist is? They're not this opinionless blank slate that just nods at you and says yes to everything. Sometimes being a therapist is having a personality and challenging people and backing off when they are ready to take the reins and go, no, actually, that's not what I want, and respecting that. There's lots of to and fro, and almost kind of like there's a real energy, and you can't have an energy between two people if the therapist has told themselves that, oh, I'm in a caring role, I've got to be. And I think that is why you used your speech marks. I think it's because we make an assumption when we say a caring role. But I actually say, whether you're a support worker, a therapist, a psychologist, a psychiatrist, a doctor, whatever you are, if you're in a supporting and nurturing role of any kind, you still have the right to be a person. And I think being a person is actually quite healing for a lot of people. And I'm in an autistic counselors and psychotherapists group that is in Australia and England, and it's on Zoom every month. It's really good. And we were talking the other day about how self-disclosure, a lot of these voluntary governing bodies and regulatory bodies in therapy and counselling wouldn't allow you really to self-disclose. And a lot of the reason some of us are independent is because that's actually a big part of what people choose us for, the fact that we're openly ND, and the fact that we will occasionally go, oh yeah, I've been through that. Or people will say, have you been through that? What did you do? And that can be healing, and that can make you feel like you've connected with another human. I've got no intention of not practicing in that way.
I often find it's just always such a complex thing, and I'm like, it doesn't have to be. It's like professionalism, like for example, just going back to like bringing a tea to a meeting, like an amount of people that brings cups of teas or coffees into meetings and just sips on it. It's like,
oh, when I said tea, sorry, I meant food. I meant like dinner, supper.
Oh,
some people do. Yes, I didn't mean a drink of tea. That's a good distinction. No, I did mean food. or your coffee. I actually know someone who brings a glass of wine. There's a person I see for therapy every so often, about 7:30 on a Tuesday. They turn up with their glass of wine and they say, I hope you don't mind. I say, no, you're relaxing. This is, for them, it's a journey of self-discovery. They're seeing me because it's an interest for them, as well as something that, you know, not everyone is going to therapy because they're desperate. They're going to therapy because they want to explore, and it's a beautiful process, and that's their thing. And some people would say that was totally unethical, but then some people say the WhatsApp system is totally unethical and that you should have absolutely no opportunity to contact your therapist between sessions. I think that's complete rubbish, and hence why I'm independent.
Yeah, definitely. It's just like, you know, the world's just a lot, and it's like people have different views on different things,
On everything.
Absolutely. Even professionalism. I'm like, I deliver training, and I swear, like, I work for a council. When I deliver my trainings, I swear, I'll be like, oh, you know what, that's fucking shit. You know, or I'll give real life examples of my own personal life. Doesn't make me any less professional. It doesn't make me any less adequate at what I'm doing.
Some people will relate more. I used to actually work with a lot of young people, a lot more than now, and some of them would swear a lot in meetings. But I would say to them, this was when I was in disability and employment, and I used to say to them, as their disability specialist, I used to say to them, as long as you're not swearing at me, I'm fine for you to speak the way you normally speak. I'm not there to police someone. If they have grown up using swear words, I am not in that particular role there to police how somebody speaks. That's how they articulate some of the most difficult things in their life. That's how they build trust. They want to know you're on the same level. Yes, it's true. If I start dropping the ends of my words and swearing because I'm trying to relate to them and look like them, that's patronizing. And when you're in the early days, I think when you have a client, you start trying to mirror them a bit, and that can actually be quite patronizing. And then I think you get to a level where you just think, no, this is me, that's you, and all of this is good, and all of this is acceptable. I'm sorry about the barking. That's my miniature sausage dog puppy in the background, Disney.
Oh, it's okay, don't worry about it. Yeah. And I feel like there's just expectations to be a certain way. I'm like, this is just neurotypical ways of like conform. And I'm like, it's not hurting anyone. It's not offending anyone. It's not reasonably offending anyone. So they should.
I think if it's not blasphemous, you know, I used to say, oh God, a lot. And then I had friends and clients who were, you know, believing and practicing Christians. And I thought, what am I doing? You know, you can't, I realized quite quickly, I thought, wow, you know, then you realize it's offensive. This thing that you've always done is offensive, because you then think, oh, that comes from obviously God, you know, and that is, you know, but I used to say that very, you know, and there were other things I used to say probably before working with XYZ person, and then questioning it and going, actually, I shouldn't be saying that. But that's how we grow.
It's such a it's such a thing with, you know, that it's such a like a normal part of your life, you know. It's another thing. It's like what I noticed is I used to like say a lot of like Arabic phrases, because I used to be fluent in Arabic. Lost it all, but
I'm learning at the moment. Jump on board, be a beginner from day one again.
It's like
Arabic's so beautiful.
Yeah, it's a beautiful language, and you know, I lost it when I moved to this placement.
Right.
Because I used to say, oh, inshallah, but
Yes.
it's like saying thank God.
Yes.
It's not a Muslim phrase.
Yep.
You know, a lot of Muslims, you know, their Bibles, textbooks, you know, religious textbooks they might use to work through, is written in Arabic. But Arabic's a language, it's not a religion.
Yes, you know, this is interesting, because when I started to learn Arabic, I actually remember saying to someone, but if I learn Arabic, am I automatically going to be acting like a Muslim? Because there are lots of God-related, Allah-related sentences. But if I'm not a Muslim, how am I going to speak Arabic? And then there are people who don't speak Arabic, but they have Quranic Arabic, don't they, for their religious practice?
Yeah, definitely. It's like we say, like people like atheists will say, "Oh, thank God! Oh my God!" All that stuff, but that doesn't mean they're Christian or Catholic,
Yeah, of
you know,
course.
because they use those phrases. Nobody would
Yeah,
say
that's so
that.
true. And I didn't even think of that when I asked the question, but we do that too, I guess, when we're speaking English, just yeah, colloquially.
Yeah, and it's just this like it's just people just like to group things into things, and I'm like, it's just me speaking. It's just
It's
linguistic.
ignorance, isn't it? It is
Yeah.
ignorance. I mean, I've realized also with it not being a Latin language, I had to stop after about 3 months. I realized I had to stop trying to translate it because it just doesn't translate and you just have to go with the flow. But I've never learned a language that wasn't based on Latin.
Mhm.
So it's really different. You know, the alphabet alone took me 6 months of weekly lessons and homework, but now I've come through that tunnel. So yeah, you should come back. come come back
That's
to the
true.
Arabic speaking world.
Yeah. Uh, and then it's that like I don't know if there's like that synergy between Arabic and English where you're speaking. You speak a bit of Arabic, a bit of English, and then a bit of anything, something else, and it's just
Is that
like
Arabish?
Arabic. Yeah, it's just yeah. To work, we just like briefly touched on workplace challenges. What are some of the most pressing challenges that neurodivergent individuals face in the workplace today? And how do these challenges differ between various types of neurodivergence or even just neurotypical versus neurodivergent? Or just not neurodiversity. Let's just say neurodiversity.
I think the main thing is something we were just talking about, which is what is a professional, and everybody has an opinion on what professional looks like. But I think there are some commonly held beliefs that a lot of people share about things like what is a team player, for example. So the autistic person who wants to go off on their own and do a project and then feed back to the group would be seen as antisocial, aloof, arrogant, not very friendly, not very approachable. An ADHDer who needs maybe to really make the most of some hyper focus and some real energy, and they're really dopamine seeking, but then the next day they're foggy headed or they're full of rejection sensitivity or they're kind of on the downer from that sort of high. I think the workplace struggles to understand that, yes, neurodivergent people can be 5 times more productive, but not consistently. In the moments where that happens, we might be, but we then need to just be normal or have downtime or, goodness knows, less productive for a while, because when you balance it all out, I think that we might be more productive, but I don't think we can consistently be 5 times more productive than neurotypicals. There are companies specifically employing ND people for their productivity, which I think is a totally irresponsible thing to do. And I think that neurotypicals buy into the social understanding of what is a professional, what is a team player. You really ought to make an effort socially because you work with these people, whereas we don't have a notion of ought to generally. There are misunderstandings like, the autistic person might arrive at work 2 minutes late every day, and people might be like, well, if you can get here 2 minutes late, you can be on time. But actually, I always say to bosses, well, actually, they're 2 minutes late probably because they're so busy avoiding the social chit chat that they want to get in where they definitely can walk in and go straight to their laptop without being seen as antisocial. Whereas if you get in at 5 to 9, you're still expected to socialize. So by avoiding any hint of anything social, you might then technically be slightly late. So then you get done for lateness and lack of punctuality, where that person might have been up since 6, waiting to go to work, but wanting to avoid those bits of the job. The social side of work is what's keeping a lot of neurodivergent people out of the workplace, not the actual work itself. That's my biggest bugbear, really. I think those are the main differences. I think it's more helpful as well to focus on those big differences, because if you go into the minutiae, it makes us sound like we're somehow a lot of extra work for people, and we're just not. And I think it's good to focus on some of those key things, because when I've done communication sessions with employers and HR and team members where there's been challenges or people have had disciplinaries or been threatened with maybe not passing probation. It's things like that being challenged where everyone's kind of gone, oh, this person's actually really great. We like having them in our team. And actually, they don't have a bad attitude. And we just sort of saw it in a different way. And it's great. Like, that's really rewarding when you can do that. And then sometimes when that doesn't work or they need some more input, we might refer them for independent workplace mediation. But for those kind of things that you've mentioned.
Yeah, definitely. There's just a different like standard. And the standard is often not, you know, thought about different
It's assumed, isn't it?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
You say you said you work with, sorry, people who are 16 plus.
People who are 16 plus, yes, sorry.
Yeah. In educational settings, what barriers do neurodivergent students commonly
Oh my
encounter?
goodness. Oh my goodness, don't get me started on universities. Universities, honestly, I know why the suicide rate is so high. Honestly, I'm just so shocked by the lack of any kind of responsibility, due diligence. If you think about ADHD, for example, as just one example, ADHD is a learning difficulty, right? Education says it's an NHS problem, it's a health problem. Yes, you could argue that they overlap, but I don't see why education thinks that ADHD is not its problem. I can't fathom how a learning difficulty shouldn't be accommodated in education where we're learning. It's just so irresponsible. I have seen so many people with suicidal thoughts having periods where they are terrified of being kicked off their course, lecturers, tutors being really inconsistent, really, impossible to contact. I've reached out to people, I've tried to hold meetings, I've tried to sort of mediate, I've tried to find funding for people to get support. Nothing. You're lucky if you get a reply from universities. And it's not every university and it's not every department. Very, often, I've got friends who've worked as university lecturers and they say, well, in my department, I had to do this, that, and the other training to be even onboarded as a lecturer. Well, that's great, but that's not the norm. That is not the norm. And it's scary. My business partner, my co-founder, Anthony, works in further education. I don't know what he would say. I don't have enough knowledge of his sector, but we're lucky to have his insight so that when something is bordering on someone who needs to be in further education or is in further education and they might be getting missed out, we at least have him on our team where we can sort of, send him in, and he's very conversant in both FE and ND. But that's not my area. So I can only speak really for higher education, and I don't work in schools as such. Although I did do a really beautiful project in Nepal with a 3,000 pupil private school in Kathmandu, which was amazing. And that was really eye-opening because they undertook to screen all of their students, totally understanding that they weren't medical, they weren't able to diagnose. It was very much about identifying traits and taking a strengths-based approach and being proactive in a country that is not yet classed as developing. I think it's going to be developing status in 2 or 3 years' time. I think that it's currently an underdeveloped country. And yet that school, it was a private school, to be fair, but it was really great to see that they were doing that. And then I could come back to England and say, look what they're doing in this, currently underdeveloped country. This is phenomenal. Why can't we do this? So that was a great experience.
Yeah, definitely. How effective are current accommodations in further education, do you think, in addressing these barriers?
So in further education, I don't know. I can say there's very little in sixth form specifically. From what I've seen, I would say it's still that classic, but you're doing really well, your grades are great, so what's the problem? Or you're lazy and underachieving, or you're not really, kicking off enough and making enough of a stink, so we can't really put you forward for diagnosis. And maybe there's an element of, well, if we put you forward for diagnosis, it will take forever and we don't have that time because you'll be leaving us soon. I don't know, because, waiting lists are what they are. So I should imagine there's a lot at play, but there's just not enough accommodations. Where I can't even comment on the ones that there are working. There just aren't enough accommodations. I'm not seeing evidence. I'm asking for people to have extra time. I'm asking for people to have study skills support when they're neurodivergent, and they're being given study skills people who have never trained in neurodiversity. So yeah, it's really tricky. It's non-existent from what I'm seeing. I mean, I'd love someone to say that's not true, but I can only speak from what I'm seeing in my private caseload and across the company and clients on different projects and services.
How do societal attitudes and misconceptions about neurodivergence impact individuals' opportunities for success in both professional and educational environments? What changes in public perception are necessary to improve these outcomes?
I think we need to separate learning disability and neurodiversity because 50% of us don't have a learning disability. I'm not saying that if you have a learning disability, the world is your oyster, there's all this funding and support, not at all. But the market I work with, which is professionals and students, they are seen as too, what is it I get told? Too articulate. I get told, my clients get told, you're too articulate, yes. You're too gifted. I hear things like, well, they can't be neurodivergent. They went to university. They did well in their A-levels. They're doing really well. They've had a good career. They're really well liked. They're too sociable. They're too confident. They can't be autistic. They've got too many friends. It's those sorts of misconceptions about the fact that you can be very good at outwardly presenting on a particular topic or in a particular field, but that doesn't mean that across the board you're able to communicate without consequences. So let's say I go out and I have a good time or I mask, that doesn't mean that for 3 days after I'm not going to have consequences on me, but nobody sees those. So it's kind of like the attitude of, well, you're managing to pull it off quite well, so can we just forget the other bits? And my argument is no, those are the bits that are basically driving far too many people to suicide. And I mention suicide because we are far, far more likely as neurodivergent people to take our own lives or to attempt to.
Definitely. I feel like there's such a high suicide rate that is just not addressed, and it needs to be.
Yeah.
It's just an ongoing issue, and I feel like central government especially are not seeing it, is not taking it seriously enough.
I don't think they're taking it seriously enough because the health professionals who advise them will be reporting on mental health. And until we separate mental health and neurodiversity and understand how they overlap, we're not going to see clearly.
Yeah. Why is advocacy crucial for advancing the rights and support for neurodivergent individuals? And what are the key elements of effective advocacy in this field?
Well, advocacy is something that unless you have had some kind of contact with a support organization in the charity or public sector, it's something most people don't know they can have. To be fair, there's very little of it around, but I benefited recently as yesterday, I had NHS complaints advocacy. We offer advocacy at Wired differently. So we're about to support someone through their employment tribunal. We advocate informally by liaising with people's doctors, by helping them book appointments, helping them get their needs met basically in everyday situations is how we define it. We don't do advocacy in the sense of, we don't practice the law. We're not paralegals. But an advocate is someone who helps you to voice your own thoughts and concerns. So they're not speaking for you. And if they are speaking for you, it's with your words or something pretty close to them. I mean, I have had to advocate for people who physically just could not be there. And I've had to sort of say, well, I will check this, but I believe the line is going to be ... from my client. That's quite rare that the client couldn't be there, but sometimes it's too damaging to them if they are very traumatized. Yesterday, when I had NHS complaints, I would say it was great because they were there, they were on Zoom. My surgery practice managers were there, but we just spoke to each other. The advocate was off camera, didn't introduce himself. They were just a presence. But up to that point, we had built rapport by them asking me very specific questions by email. I got back to them. They were very receptive. They didn't judge me. They never sort of questioned what I said. They just took it as read that what I said was the truth. So they went to the surgery and said, we want to set up a meeting to discuss these things. There was no doubting me. There was no gaslighting. It was the things they didn't do, actually, that helped me build trust in them. But it wasn't a legal process. I don't know what training they have, but it wasn't, I think any really good listener who's invested in the cause of advocacy could have done that job. I don't think it's a highly skilled job. I think it's a very necessary job. I think it's a job that actually a lot of ND people would be really good at, and that most people probably never thought of working as an advocate. But, I said to them on the call, you're probably wondering why a professional person of 46 who can do public speaking and run a company needs an advocate in the room right now. But I can tell you, I've literally just had 3 sessions of brain spotting, and I know that after this call, I'm going to be fine. But if this had been 2 months ago, I dread to think, actually, the state I would have been on after this call. In fact, on the call, during, during and post call, and that could have lasted weeks. So I said, I'm pretty much here because I've had trauma therapy. Obviously not just about that particular thing, although I do see a lot of people where their main trauma is actually from being in the system, whether that's NHS or benefits or something else that's public sector. So I think advocacy is hugely important. And I think it's really important. There are some days I can't speak at certain moments because I just can't speak. It doesn't happen very often. I mean, the most recent example, I had the meltdown on the train. There was a drunk guy who got on the train and he started shouting across the train, "What's the name of your dog?" And I just pretended I couldn't hear. I had my ear defenders on. I just pretend that they were, music earphones. And he just kept shouting. And why won't the lady with the dog talk to me? And, he was drunk. And I just completely pretended I was listening to loud music, but I was getting more and more and more tense in my body because, well, I don't like being around drunk people for starters. And then I just sort of lost the ability to do anything. So my cognitive ability started to shut down. So I sort of got my things together, my things and my puppy's things. And I was starting to do everything very calculated and very slowly, which is always a sign that my brain's shutting down. I managed to get myself to the end of this very busy carriage with all of our stuff, all sort of packed hurriedly. But I knew that if someone talked to me, I wouldn't be able to speak. And if I did, it would lead me to a meltdown. So it'd be best if I didn't. By the time I started hiding in the luggage rack, I was rubbing my thighs, unable to talk. And I sort of pulled on a member of staff's wrist and showed them my phone where I had typed, "I'm having an autistic meltdown. I can't speak, but there's a drunk man. Please, can you stand with me?" kind of thing. And she just kept offering me water. She just kept saying, "Can I get you water? Can I get you water? Can I get you water?" And I completely understand that they're not trained in, a neurodivergent adult having a meltdown without being a kid with parents to look after them. I get that that's weird when you work on a train. And I didn't want anything more than just somebody to stand there. So, I could advocate by typing that on my phone. It didn't stop her asking me if I wanted water, but I could see the intention was sweet and her facial expressions were nice. And actually, I was really proud of myself because when we arrived into Paddington, I got off the train and I managed to regulate almost immediately. Whereas that, again, previously that could have taken days and days. So I've got really quick at it now. And that's one of the benefits of our app is we've got some free type communication cards so that they're kind of branded and you hold your phone up and they'll have like the logo and it will look like an actual card rather than me typing on a blank page, which looks weird. So it'll look more official and it will be like, you can type them out and then swipe them to whoever, because that's a form of self-advocacy.
How can organizations and individuals work together to foster a more inclusive and supportive environment for neurodivergent people? What are some best practices for collaboration and advocacy efforts?
The public and private sectors need to speak to each other. So, yesterday I said to the surgery when I had my complaint, you keep sending me emails about smear tests. I have told every single person I've come into contact with that I cannot be examined. I have to go to the hospital to be anesthetized to be examined. I said, if this was a card shop, you would send me an email a week before Mother's Day to say, if you don't want to receive a Mother's Day card because it's too triggering, please opt out. I've told you that my smear test is so traumatic, I need to be knocked out to have one, but you think nothing of sending me letters through the post telling me to have one. I said, do you not see that there are things in the private sector that you could learn from, and that would not cost much, you know? And she said, well, we could physically opt you out of that email, but then we'd have to remember every year to opt you out. And I said, well, your system needs changing. But you see, if you had a service designer doing a sort of customer experience design on that customer journey, if that was the card shop, they would be like, well, no, we don't want to be. I mean, I know sometimes it's a marketing ploy to get you to buy Mother's Day cards, but my point being, they don't even have a system where they can opt me out of something that triggering.
That's absolutely ridiculous.
Yeah. And then she said, and I don't blame her, the practice manager, because one point she said was, oh, can we have your PA's number? And I said, yes. And she said, well, I'll put it on landline. I said, why? Can't you just put it as my PA? And she said, well, no, there's no space on the system for a carer. And I said, well, surely if 20% of people are neurodivergent, so by nature they have a communication issue, and then on top of that, you've got a higher percentage that are disabled generally. And then on top of that, you've got people with dementia. And then you've got people with learning disability. I said probably about 50, 60% of your patients need someone to speak for them at times. And you're telling me you don't have one place to put that on your screen. And I said to them, one of the reasons I keep having meltdowns about my surgery is you keep ringing me out of the blue. And I've told you again and again and again, I can't pick the phone up while it's ringing if you've not told me you're going to ring. I'll just look at it, watch it ringing. I mean, that is probably the most autistic thing that anybody knows about an autistic person, is they don't tend to pick up the phone when they don't know who's calling or when it's going to ring or what it's going to be about. But they've consistently made appointments by phone, cancelled them by phone, told me to come in for things I didn't even know existed. Just not getting it, you know, and I just don't understand why the public and private don't speak to each other. Another thing was, I said to them, do you know I can do a smear test at home? And they said, well, no, we wouldn't know that. And I said, well, your doctors will know that is a thing. Sorry, hang on. So yesterday when it came up with the doctors about, this point about the public and private talking to each other, I sort of said, well, all of this stress around smear tests could have been avoided because, do you know, I could just pay £70 and have a smear test. Well, it's every 3 years. I'm not saying that I have £70 falling out of my pocket every 2 minutes, but when it's a 3-yearly thing and it creates that much distress, I might as well just suck it up. And they sort of said, oh, well, our doctors wouldn't have known about that, And I said, really? And she said, yeah, because we don't offer it on the NHS. And I said, well, I get that they work for the NHS, but they are independently of that medical doctors. So they must know about medical innovation that's in the marketplace. They must have peers that are medically qualified from the courses they took who are working in other areas other than general practice. I said, yes, I get that you might not endorse it. And you could say, oh, we don't endorse it because it's not been on the market very long, but if you wanted to look into it. But I said, people like me are clogging up your wait lists because you're just not aware that there's these things out there. I'm on obesity medication, and I've had a really complicated relationship with food through my life, probably partly because of having ADHD, but I think I just genetically have issues as well. I think a lot of it's genetic. And anyway, I didn't meet criteria for obesity drugs, but they didn't tell me I could go and buy them. So that was a 3-month thing that was impacting on my mental health, my senses my sensory challenges were kicking off because nothing fitted. I didn't have the executive function to keep planning clothing around the way that my body was changing weekly and getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, I reached a certain weight, which was 20 kilos more than what I'm meant to be, but without doing anything. I was eating less and less. I was cutting out anything I'm allergic to. I was doing testing. I was exercising. I was doing everything you're supposed to do, but I just have this I'm predisposed to obesity and I'm perimenopausal. And I said, you could have said to me months ago, you don't qualify for funding for this, but you can go and buy it. And then if I wanted to buy it and I could afford it, I would have done. And I did. And I said, but you don't tell me that your doctors just don't know this stuff is out there. Because you telling me, you don't meet criteria, we can't give it to you, we can't fund it, one thing. But just tell me to Google it, But the public and private have got to start speaking to each other, because I find it quite negligent that this innovation is out there. And because I'm connected to doctors who work in tech, they don't have the constraints of the NHS. They can be more transparent. They're often, working for their own startups. So I get a lot of insight into what you can and can't do as a doctor working in the system. And I feel that that's true of public and private all over. I feel like, we've started advocacy. That's quite unusual to have a private paid advocate. Generally, an advocate would come through, say, a charity, like a sort of Citizens Advice or something. So having private advocacy, private support work, as opposed to it being provided by social services is a game changer. But it doesn't really exist. So we're trying to create a niche for it, and we're trying to show people that it's okay to have a support worker, like it's okay to pay your cleaner or your gardener or your window cleaner or the person that gets you shopping, or someone who gives you a lift to the hospital. There's no shame in paying for support. But if the public and private spoke, we could be more innovative, we could save money, we could manage waiting lists. Me talking to you about brain spotting, that cost me £195 for 3 sessions. You could save so much money if that was offered on the NHS. EMDR is offered, but this is 6 times faster. So it would save so much money. And that really frustrates me, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely. I can see how it's frustrating. It's just one barrier after the other, really.
Yeah, it is. It is.
What role does media and popular culture play in shaping perceptions of neurodivergence, and how can these platforms be leveraged to promote a more accurate and positive understanding of neurodivergent experiences?
I think it does go back to representation. I watched a really good new sitcom on BBC this week called We Might Regret This. And the main character is tetraplegic. And it was brilliant. It was relevant. It was funny. It was edgy. It was modern. It was just a normal person living about, it was about their relationships, about who they live with, about family. And it was just, there was some in-jokes about disability, and it was just fantastic. And I thought, we need so much more of this. I thought there was a really good example of really positive disability representation, but we don't have enough of it.
For listeners who want to make a difference in the neurodivergent community, what are actionable steps they can take to support advocacy and awareness efforts? How can they start making an impact in their own communities?
That's a really good question. I think by being open-minded and educating themselves and then sharing their knowledge, because there's a lot of people spreading stereotypes who actually don't know what they're talking about, and definitely by making more use of lived experience.
Can you recommend specific organizations or resources that individuals can support or get involved with to further, the neurodivergent cause? How can people find out more about these opportunities?
Some of the best resources are free. So there's the How to ADHD YouTube channel with Jessica McCabe. I recommend that. I like all sorts of books on Anxiety and Depression by, say, Human Givens, the Human Givens Institute. I don't follow them entirely. I'm not a Human Givens therapist, but I like their book.
So, what role does media and popular culture play in shaping perceptions of neurodivergence? And how can these platforms be leveraged to promote a more accurate and positive understanding of neurodivergent experiences?
Well, I think that social media has actually been really positive for neurodivergent people. Because there's lots of people talking about their lived experience, and frequently they also have professional skills in that field. So that's brilliant. And I don't subscribe to the view that everyone's watching TikTok and thinks they've got ADHD all of a sudden. I think that it's actually been a real positive. And there were a lot of people post-pandemic who were really worried about their sort of traits and didn't know what was going on with them. And then they got more and more exaggerated over time with the lockdown. And naturally, that led to a lot of people needing to be diagnosed. So I think social media has been really good. Having said that, I've not really seen anything negative either. So I'm sure that there are things out there that I would not advise, but I've not come across them myself. And I've never had a client come to me that they've mentioned a source that's been worrying. And on TV, it would be great if there was a lot more representation other than Sheldon on the Big Bang Theory. As great as he is, and I know that he's not technically ever, meant to have been autistic, I think, but he sort of acts as if. But I mean, there's not much representation, I don't think. And I think that other than the panorama we had about, another sort of myth perpetuating a program about everyone's got ADHD now and it's really easy to be diagnosed kind of thing, which I think is utter rubbish. We don't really see a lot else. So it would be great to have a lot more representation, definitely.
You know what? There's this Korean Netflix series.
Mm-hmm. I know which one you're going to say.
Eternity Woo.
Yes, I've seen it.
I feel like that was a really good representation.
I saw a little of it. It had really good reviews, but I wasn't patient enough to keep going. I'm not very good on fiction and programs that aren't documentaries. But yes, a lot of people really liked it and said the same.
Yeah.
I'm glad you enjoyed it.
Yeah. I watch it with my autism, that need for familiarity. I watch it again and again and again.
Yes.
So yeah, it's quite good.
We do that with programs and songs and everything, don't we? It's so comforting, isn't it?
Yeah, I will listen to a song like 80 times, and my headphones, if it's just like a bit away from my ear, I was like, again. What's like, again? I'm like, yeah, again. I had this. There was this phrase that I liked so much that I've watched this 10-second clip. That day, I probably watched it over a few hundred times.
Wow, I know exactly what you mean. I've done that with riffs in songs in Hamilton, the musical. I've played the same little line again, and it's just so perfect. I don't know, why do we do that? It's so weird, isn't it?
Yeah. There's so many different reasons, I feel like. It's like it's just nice the way that it feels in my ear. It's like the way that, if it's like loud, how this, stereo, whatever, vibrates. Yeah.
Really soothing, isn't it?
Definitely. Looking back on our conversation, what's the most important takeaway or message you want our audience to remember?
I think the lack of representation, the fact that 50% of us who are autistic don't have a learning disability, and that please don't get the two conflated, because you might have autism and a learning disability, but you may also not have LD at all, which really does change the game quite a bit in terms of vulnerability and, what our expectations might be for the future and the kind of support we might need. Not better, not worse, just different, very, very different people, or different sort of markets if you're trying to sell to us as neurodivergents. I think those are the two main things for me, really. I think that's come up quite a bit in our conversation.
Are there any upcoming projects, events, or resources you'd like to share with our audience?
I know that Julia at Six Pillars is doing a lot around women's health, and that might sound obscure, but the intersection between neurodiversity and women's health is quite pronounced. So I'm always very excited about anyone who's doing anything in the space of women's health for that reason. So, for example, you've got greater likelihood of having PMDD, for example, if you are, if you have ADHD, and PMS symptoms being aggravated, if you're perimenopausal and neurodivergent. There's lots of crossover. So I think the women's health space is good to look at. I think that the women's or the tech space is interesting. The med tech and health and well-being tech space is very exciting, because what we don't see on the NHS is all the innovation that is occurring that the NHS can't keep up with, because it's a public service and they are there to treat people for emergencies. And I guess maybe there's an element of looking into that kind of innovation as a bit of a luxury if you've got a higher caseload of patients and you just need to get through the day to day. I don't know how GPs do it, to be fair. So I think look towards med tech for where we could be going in the future, and self-testing is really exciting. But I think specifically in the neurodiversity space, I would say the innovation in terms of the support that's available in the workplace. So more insurance companies covering diagnoses for ND conditions as part of their insurance cover. That's quite different. Different approaches for support, whether that's support workers, therapists, coaches. There's more pluralism around what support looks like. It's not all therapy, it's not all coaching. And there are some incredible books out there. People are releasing books all the time. I'm actually releasing a book with my co-author, hopefully in October. We think the 10th of October, and that's around intimacy, sex and relationships for people identifying as female who are neurodivergent. So that's also coming out. But yeah, there's quite a lot around, and there's a lot of free stuff. There are a lot of great accounts. I would just say, once you find one person and you follow them, have a look at who they're following, and then just build your online community, because very often that's where we find our tribe nowadays, not in person, unfortunately.
I definitely agree with that. Where can our listeners find you or connect with you to stay up to date with your work?
The main idea would be maybe to go to my LinkedIn. That's my main platform. That's my puppy waking up. wireddifferently.co.uk, startdifferently.org.uk, and wonderful.app. But wonderful doesn't have an O, remember.
Perfect. Well, it's going to be linked down below in Bring's show descriptions of Spotify and YouTube. Finally, what is one thing that you're grateful for today?
I'm grateful for the ability and opportunity to work for myself, because that's really been life-changing. Not because I don't think I'm employable. I never encourage self-employment for people who think that's the last resort. I don't think that's the way of doing it. But I am incredibly grateful for the mentors I've had, some of the financial backing I've had. I'm grateful for all of the financial backing I've had. And what I mean to say is there's not been that much of it. We've been pretty much self-sustaining since I think, day one. And the people I've met, I think on LinkedIn, I've met the most incredible community of people who've become in-person, real-life friends, collaborators. I'm very, very grateful for LinkedIn, definitely.
Yeah, I love. Spent a lot of time on LinkedIn. It's a bit concerning. Thank you so much for coming onto our podcast and, making time today to, film the last bit as well.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And that's really good timing, because Disney's waking up properly now, and otherwise we'll have an action replay of yesterday.
As we wrap up today's enriching conversation with Sara-Louise Ackrill, it's clear that her journey is a testament to the incredible strength and potential within the neurodivergent community. From the pioneering work of Wired Differently to the impactful initiative Start Differently and the innovative Wonderful app, Sara-Louise has truly set a high bar for empowering individuals and transforming lives. We've explored how each of our ventures uniquely supports neurodivergent professionals and students, providing them with tailored resources and opportunities to thrive. The story of success and the insights shared today offer hope and a powerful reminder of the value of embracing and nurturing neurodiversity. If you're inspired by today's discussion and want to learn more about Sara-Louise's organization, make sure to visit the links down below in the show description. Follow Sara-Louise on social media to stay up to date on her latest project and advocacy efforts. Remember, Whether you're neurodivergent or an ally, there are always ways to contribute and make a positive impact. Engage with the resources and communities discussed today, and let's continue the conversation beyond this podcast. A big thank you to Sara-Louise Ackrill for sharing her incredible journey and insights with us. Your work is truly transformative, and we're grateful for the opportunity to spotlight it on our show. To our listeners, we appreciate your time and attention. Your support means the world to us, and we hope you found today's episode as inspiring and thought-provoking as we did. Until then, make sure you keep pushing boundaries, embracing your unique strengths, and striving for excellence. Remember, you have the power to shape your own narrative and make a meaningful difference in the world. Stay iconic until next time.